Welcome to the Checklist panel discussion on crime and policing. We are very honored and privileged to have here tonight our two of our shadows for the Ministry of National Security, Senator Jayanti Lutchmedial and Dr. Roodal Moonilal. And from civil society, we have attorney Darren Mitchell joining us. I want to welcome each and every one of you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good.
Thank you.
Let's just jump into this right away. Crime is, even though we're in COVID and so forth, and even under the state of emergency, crime was rising, and now in 2022, we're experiencing record rates, and we really need to get a hold on this thing, and I want to hear your view. So let me start with the questions, and each of you are very well experienced, in these matters. And so I want to ask you, each one, if you had to identify one major problem with regard to crime that needed tackling first, right? So if you had to prioritize it, what would it be for you and why? Let me start with you, Jayanti.
Okay, what I would say, and one of the things that I think that the government has really done to contribute to rising crime is the dismantling of a lot of the social support and services that we previously had. I am a strong advocate for tackling the root cause of crime. When you take away people's opportunities, when you take away certain aspects of social support, education, access to education, and you make those things harder, you are automatically, in a way, pushing people towards a life of crime. I don't think that people are, in most cases in this country, are born inherently bad. I believe that, there's, in crime, you have the theory of nature versus nurture. And a lot of what we have in this country are people who are driven towards committing crimes based on their circumstances. If you try to alleviate the circumstances into which people are born, or the type of environment that they are raised in, and you try to give them opportunities to come out of those circumstances and situations, then you steer them away from a life of crime. The focus has shifted somewhat towards punishment and not so much towards addressing the underlying issues like poverty, mental health, things like, when you have domestic type crimes, dealing with issues like gender-based violence issues and things like that. We don't have enough focus on those things. So if I had to say that I want to tackle one thing, I would tackle on a societal level, so that you don't have crime happening, because you have the beginning, middle, and end when it comes to crime. And I would want to focus on the beginning because it prevents crime. So crime prevention, crime detection, and conviction are the three phases you go through. And I would like to focus more on prevention, because at the end of the day, and I've seen it for myself being in the system for about almost 15 years, that no matter how much detection and conviction that you have, if you don't tackle prevention, you're like a hamster on a wheel. You just keep going and going and going. So I would focus on.
To that point, I saw a Facebook post saying, with so many children, especially in the East-West corridor, actually literally dropped out of school now because of the whole COVID policy. We may reap the whirlwind later on in terms of crime. I mean, I don't know if that's the kind of link you're making.
Yeah, I remember I started once in Parliament, and the whole PNM bench stoops and roll their eyes and whatever. But I said that I think we were debating the anti-gang legislation. And I questioned why a government would bring this legislation to jail and lock up people and deny them bail when they are accused of being part of a gang, but they are not tackling the issues. In fact, they are creating a situation. And I think that's what I said that provoked their disgust and disdain, that they are creating a situation that is ripe for gang activity. They are creating a situation where children, you recall there was a point in time where they said 2,000 children had not logged on to online classes for a period of time. What's going to happen to those 2,000 children when they want to enjoy the lifestyle that they see other children having, when they don't get an education, when they are locked out of the system, when they cannot get a job? doesn't crime and the gang life become attractive to people like that?
I mean, you used to be you were a prosecutor in the DPP's office, is that correct?
Yeah, that's why I started off in 2006. And you know, it's an eye-opening experience when you interact with those people. Of course, you think that being a prosecutor and being on the side of the state, you want to punish criminals as much as possible. But then I remember at various points in time interacting with young people who had committed violent crimes, and then learning through, you know, one way or the other that they had been sexually abused, that their parents were drug addicts who used to prostitute them for drug money, that they were exposed to extreme acts of violence as children, and no one ever tried to fix the issues that they went through. Nobody tried to fix their trauma. So what you have are people walking around with trauma who are desensitized when it comes to a situation of crime, and therefore the life of crime goes that way. Again, poverty is an underlying cause of crime as well. People are, I'm not saying it's right, but they feel that this is the only way that they can have certain things in their life, and they are driven by that. So it's a problem that we have to tackle at that root level to deal with prevention. Otherwise, as I said, no amount of detection and conviction, which is poor as it stands, but no amount, even if we raise the level of detection and conviction, if you're not tackling the prevention, you're just going to have more people moving through the system.
Okay, let me invite Darren Mitchell here to answer the question. With your experience in the field, you know, if there's one thing that you think needs to be tackled first, what do you think it should be?
Firstly, let me endorse what Sister Lutchmedial said. I'm in full agreement with those issues that she raised as being one of the things. For me, the disconnect with the TTPS and the citizenry is one very serious thing, because, for example, the manner in which the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, police officers treat citizens, the disrespect, the insensitivity, the callousness, in some instances, the bully approach. They're not focusing on partnering with the citizenry. No, every single criminal offense that's committed is known, seen by someone, somebody within the citizen. Why are they not carrying the news then? For many reasons. How could we partner with somebody that we don't trust? How could we partner with somebody who treats us like animals at times when we go to make a report? How could we partner with someone who, after we reach at the station counter, before we leave the station, the information is transmitted to the person of whom we are complaining, about whom we are complaining? Partnership is very important. That trust, you see that disconnect? We will go nowhere unless that disconnect is healed. The citizenry in turn will respect the police. It will be a joy to take up a phone to tell officer, look, I now see you hiding a gun there. Look, I'm in a car and I hear them planning to do this. So alongside the multi-pronged approach, that in particular is very important. We have and I don't put water in my mouth to say it because, as I just always say, I ain't afraid them a little bit. Police service currently is quite important. They're not telling people that. Important. They lose the battle, and we have the order of the day right now is an AR-15 and a AK-47, brazen shootings in Port of Spain, in South, at South Park. A man making up his mind to kill a man anyway, anyhow, don't care about the police. Why? Is because the police themselves don't care about the citizen. Crimes go and crimes come. For particular persons, you would find CCTV footage being gathered and so on for particular things. Now, I don't get into the politics, but the facts is the facts. there are situations where people lost phones, simple things as phones. I'm not trying to trivialize things.
Yeah.
We have the command center operating with these big lovely screens, these 100 and 200 screens, and they get back the phone.
Definitely.
On
You
the
know,
other hand,
when you're talking about the disconnect, and when I speak to Dr. Moonilal next, I will probably ask him to comment on it. But community policing was a big thing under the UNC administrations, and do you think something like that is what you're talking about?
that is a very important aspect, real community policing, not people dressing up and just passing by your house and asking if you're all right. You must know so Mrs. So-and-so, Constable so-and-so, and befriend them. You must invite them for a cup of tea. They must invite you at some time, the things that they have and so on. And then you be no escape, nowhere for the criminals to breathe.
Yeah.
But no, it's a right breeding ground. So that is my issue. I see disconnect.
All right, very good. And Dr. Moonilal, you know, you're currently the shadow for one of the shadows for the Ministry of National Security, but you were also in 2 administrations. And I know it wasn't your portfolio, but you sat in the cabinet where the only time that crime actually went down in this country was in the 2 governments that you were part of. So I you know, think you would have some great insight to add there. But, you know, so from your experience and your current portfolio, what would you think in your mind, what you would want to focus on and say the single most important thing?
Well, Kurt, first let me say good day to you and to Senator Lutchmedial and my very dear friend Darren, attorney at law in Port of Spain and Trinidad and Tobago. It's a pleasure to be on the checklist and on this discussion. Without spending too much time to endorse, I fully concur with the views expressed by Senator Lutchmedial on the holistic nature of the social problem that is crime, and on the need to fix the systematic and institutional issues that Senator Lutchmedial raises. I, of course, concur with Darren Mitchell on the critical point of building partnerships with community between law enforcement and community. That partnership is multifaceted, as Mr. Mitchell indicated. It is something that has to be developed. It is organic. It is organic. It works. It is a proven success story that partnerships with the police helps, whether it is in high risk, high conflict areas, high crime areas, and so on. Partnership helps. So I don't want to go too much into it. I concur with both speakers before me. And now, the point I want to make as an introduction is that fighting crime is not a 5-year plan. It is not something that you start and stop and start over and stop and start over. Crime is not an electoral cycle that way. It is a continuum. It is something that governments have to proceed with, adopt policy, and fix policy that stays for a period of time. What we have had here is electoral disruptions to policy. And when the party changed, there's a complete dismantling of policy, of program, of institutions. And I don't want to dwell on the points made by Senator Lutchmedial and Mr. Mitchell. I just agree. But I want to make the fresh point, so to speak, that when we were there, we spent a lot of time. I spent 5 years, incidentally, Kurt, as a member of the National Security Council. And we spent a lot of time on providing resources, technical and technological resources to law enforcement to assist. Tonight, there's a situation in my constituency where we have a simple thing. Well, I say simple, but it's not simple. But we have a noise disturbance where a neighbor is making noise, playing music loud and disturbing elderly people from sleeping. Now, Kurt, that may not affect you. It will not affect others, but it affects the elderly people in the home who have to take medication and get a night rest. The police has been a bit lackluster in terms of responding. They have made reports. That is a real problem that face people on the ground. The real problem that face people is a lack of action, so to speak. And that has to do also with resources. And when we were there, for example, we did a uploading of resources, whether it was helicopters, whether it was, materials for the police. A simple thing, we underestimate, and sometimes we joke that every UNC government buy police cars. But you have to have a very vicious and very, very visible police patrol in the communities. I used to be proud when people tell me in HDC communities and so on, every time they look in the gallery, they see blue flashing light all over the community. Now, it is not a good thing, because it's not that we promote the militarization of society through law enforcement, but you had to give people this sense of comfort that the police is nearby. So we have the partnership Darren Mitchell speak about, but the police is physically there, that they are watching your back, so to speak. And the patrols are very important. We had helicopter support. I mean, up to this day, I say with some deep, pity, that when that child was kidnapped and eventually murdered in January 2020 or thereabout, CCTV cameras were not working. There was no helicopter patrols. You remember a couple of weeks ago or a month, so there was a shootout in the highway in the vicinity of the Couva Hospital. Kurt, you would be surprised to know it was a private helicopter that was quickly flagged down like a taxi driver to go up in the air, to go airborne to search for a criminal that had firearm that could have shot at the helicopter and kill a civilian pilot. Our information is that it was a civilian helicopter because the government had abandoned our helicopter program, which meant just paying some money every year for a lease of a chopper, having it licensed, having it in use, so that they did that. They dismantled our program of aerial support to the police. They dismantled the National Command Center that Gary Griffith and others worked very hard to build. At the height of this crisis, while Mr. Young boasts now that we have 80% CCTV camera footage, you will be shocked to know that in January 2010, the CCTV camera footage was about 45%. Almost half the cameras up were not working. And it is only when the opposition really peddled on this issue and pushed it that contracts were awarded to TSTT and others to go and do remedial work. So if I have to put my finger on the button now, in addition to what the Senator and Mr. Mitchell said, I would speak to the resource transfers that are required for real policing. And resource, I don't mean, just changing uniform and putting people in a different boots and shirt and pants and so on. I mean getting the actual resources to the police, to the cop on the street, and ensuring that they can come out tonight and protect this country in the wee hours of darkness when people are so vulnerable to crime. Like I saw a video allegedly of some incident in Trinity in a car park. And I mean, it's shocking that these things will happen now. I travel, for example, from Port of Spain to San Fernando in the night at times. And if I tell you, sometimes I come down the highway and I see not one single patrol between Port of Spain to San Fernando. And that is shocking because they ought to be fixing the cars. They ought to be having, patrols. Now, we can speak about the quality of policing. We can talk about the detection rate. We can talk about all that. But if they're not physically there in the first place and they don't give that sort of comfort. Look, when we were there, Kurt, I mean, I have to remind you and your viewers and listeners, we had something called the Community Comfort Patrol. What we did is that we established the private security industry patrols for certain communities so that the police would be relieved. The police would not have to do patrols in several areas. They were liaised with private security who would patrol in areas, and the police would be left to do what is called the tough policing. The really bad areas, the hotspots, the criminal gang issues and so on. The police would be done that. Do you know in certain parts of Diego Martin, for example, the population, the residents became, as Darren would like to know, the residents actually became very close to the private security police officers on comfort patrol. So much so that if somebody was having a baby and they had to be rushed to the hospital and so on, they actually would call the private security company to take the mother to the hospital. The elderly people knew by name the security officers and the private patrol. They became friends. And this government, I mean, they dismantle all of that because in their mind, you're paying money and they have a problem paying money for service. They prefer, just squander and corrupt themselves and don't provide the goods and service. So I think that what we require really is to return to a strategy, in addition to, of course, what the Senator and Mr. Mitchell is saying, to return to a strategy of resource transfer in critical areas that would make the difference. And I will end this part by highlighting, for example, Mrs. Kamala Prasad-Bissessa as Prime Minister. Several times I visited with her to the IATF, I believe, center of the highway, Churchill Roosevelt Highway, in which anytime we found that crime was rearing its head, we would quickly move to implement army police patrols. Again, what did that do? It brought relief. It brought the crime level down. Even if it was temporary, it came down. Today, when you look in the cities, you look at the villages and so on, I don't think anybody recognizes a police army patrol of any kind where the army gives support to the police in monitoring criminal activity and so on. So I would end the first round on that note, Kurt.
Okay, well, thanks very much. So, if we just quickly summarize it, it's like the causes of crime and the social aspects. On the one hand, the relationship of the police to the citizens, and then resourcing the police themselves. Those are very, very important things, definitely. Sorry. For this second question, let me make it, I guess, a bit more open-ended, and anybody could jump in as they wish. And it's more of like, in your own view, what do you think, has been driving crime trends over the past decades? People talk about, the drug trade and these sorts of things. I'd like to know what you think has been driving crime, and both in the very short term, because in the past month or two, it's been escalating, and I guess you could even talk maybe more about the medium or long term. But what are some of the things that you guys have seen? I'll leave it open. Anybody who wants, to jump in, please do.
Well, let me. There are many things, but I would say one of the things that why I think serious crime and gun-related offenses, there's a proliferation of that, and what's driving that is the availability of weapons, the failure to secure the border, and the way that weapons are easily available now, I think, has significantly driven up the amount of gun-related offenses. So that's one of the driving forces that I have noticed. In the past, you would hear about break-ins and robberies and so on being committed by persons using less sophisticated weapons. I think Mr. Mitchell identified now that AR-15 or whatever it is. I don't know what weapons, but it's the norm. Everybody has access to an illegal firearm. And one of the things that is surprising is that we're focusing more right now on legal firearms and licensed firearms, and who have licensed firearms and how they get it. And we really aren't, tackling the problem of illegal firearms. So I think that availability of illegal firearms is a driving factor in crime. It just becomes so easy for people to get access to these weapons that crime is, you don't have to do much planning on.
Do you have any idea where these arms are coming from? Is it Venezuela and Colombia? Is it America? Well, I don't know.
It could come from anywhere. The fact is, if you have a porous border, and we've always, I think since I was in high school, we learned this term transshipment points, that people talk about Trinidad being a transshipment point for, at the time it was more drugs, but the fact of the matter is that our location, our proximity to South America, and the unsecured South Coast, Southwestern Peninsula, essentially, it just makes the entry of anything, whether it's illegal goods, contraband, whatever it is, it makes everything so easy to come into the country. So that I think is one of the things that's driving driving crime to some extent. Of course, there are many other things that take place. When the economy isn't growing and you don't have a lot of opportunities, and this comes back to the social side, that would also drive up crime.
How about you, Dr. Moonilal or Darren?
I heard that India mentioned about these firearms and so on. And you asked the question, where does it come from? a great number of the firearms, I don't know why they're not telling people that, is engraved in them, made in the USA.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. They're the biggest
They are
arms
brand new
manufacturers in the
firearms.
world.
These things come through our ports, in microwaves, in fridges, in washing machines. It's known. Yet, I just can't understand how it continues to happen. US-made arms is the major fine. Obviously, you'll get things like FAL and these situations, which is coming from Colombia and Venezuela and so on. Hardly would you find US firearms in Venezuela, and you'll understand because of the political dynamic and the disconnect. It would not be American-made firearms. And this is known. My question is, where are the scanners? Where are these things that could just look through these microwaves and identify that, look, something looking funny there?
Yeah, because I mean, just to expand on that, Jayanti's point, Trinidad being a transshipment point, is that the drugs kind of come in and go out, go out to America. So it goes from south up to north, but the guns, from my understanding, come the other way. It's north to Trinidad and then south.
Absolutely right.
Yeah.
Absolutely right. In addition, clear, needed policies with respect to, I'll give an example. It's well known that the hub for serious criminal activity is the prisons of Trinidad and Tobago. There where people have, these youths have all the time on their hands, they take up their cell phones and they call a shot and they get a $5,000-$10,000, they send it for the girl, they buy a block of weed, they sell it, they're buying houses.
I know criminologists often refer to prisons as like a university of crime. So people go there for a small crime or then remand, but they associate with.
Yes, you're correct. And what we have is that 1838, I think, is the prison rules. What about the policies? How are you bringing about the reformation? When you have all these people in here, you're breeding criminals, built up and pent up anger, fury, discontent, all being unleashed on society, innocent society, because the system has failed. You stick somebody in there who spit on a pavement and stick him in with 13 other persons who evil has dominated their thoughts for one reason or the other. What do you expect? How would that person survive? They have to conform. What is in place? Why are these people still being made? I call them people, not even prisoners. Why are these people still being made to use slop pails and do numbers in gazette paper and send it down a corridor and these kind of operations? And it's inhuman. What is being done? Yeah. We have inspector of prisons being changed every 3 years. Sometimes the same person is just recycling the issue. Where is this commission of inquiry? But they know because there are reports and so on, and nothing happens. So it will continue to cycle and recycle like that because of that absence of clear, needed policies for reformation, rehabilitation, swift justice as well. Swift justice is important. If any criminal knows that he's arrested in January and by March you get 10 or 15 years, I challenge the best to want to suffer that fate. You wouldn't want to. But you sit there and you show in 8, 10 years you'll get bail, witnesses will die, a policeman will get
come to court and it matters.
Yes. That is the other multifaceted approach as Dr. Moonilal alluded to. So we need everybody hands-on.
Yeah, I think that prison reform is your prison reform, and I have to agree that prison has turned into, and remand yard in particular, and that's why this bail case that I was a part of, I was so passionate about it, because let me tell you something. Remand yard has turned from a place where you secure people awaiting trial into a place where you're creating criminals. Remand yard conditions are so bad. It is actually another case before the court, which I'm also involved in, so I don't want to talk too much about it, but where we are saying that the remand prison and the circumstance, the set up at remand yard and the conditions in remand are so much worse than maximum security prison, where so you have persons enjoying the presumption of innocence that are subjected to far worse conditions than people who are actually convicted. Could you imagine that?
Absolutely right.
10 years ago or more, I think there was a judgment coming out from the court in the matter of Colin Edgehill, which I'm sure Darren is familiar with.
Yes, Colin Edgehill.
Justice Gobin went into great detail about prison conditions and how inhumane and all of that was. And what has changed? We did a matter recently and we had to go all the way to the Privy Council for a declaration that you could not and should not keep, that you shouldn't keep children in an adult prison. Sounds elementary, right? But believe it or not, you had to go all the way to the Privy Council to make that point. And, the conditions under which people were living in the remand prison and the women's prison and all that, was featured there. And the state tries to defend these things like a slop bail in the year 2022. Now, I understand the reasoning behind what they talk about and whatever and so on, but it doesn't every other country in the world have prisons with toilets that flush? Or, for the most part. Have you ever seen what a European prison looks like? Have you ever seen what it's not, you don't have people living in these conditions. When you put people into these conditions, do you expect rehabilitation is non-existent in Trinidad? And a lot of it has to do with prison conditions. A lot of it has to do with, as you say, the length of time people spend awaiting trial. When you have a criminal record and you cannot produce, and it says pending, all right, we have cases pending. When you have a matter, a serious offense, let's say it's robbery, sexual offense, something that showing up as pending against you for 10 years, even if you are out on bail, you are unemployable for the most part for 10 years, unless somebody giving you a job to dig a drain or to do, manual labor and so on. You cannot uplift and take yourself out of the circumstances that may have led to you becoming involved in criminal activity in the first place when you are waiting for 10 years to clear your name, and I make the point about this person who we represented or who was in litigants in this matter dealing with bail, Mr. Akili Charles, who the state did not even have enough evidence to get past a preliminary inquiry. But it took 9 years. 9 years from 19 to 28, the prime of your life, when everybody going to university, learning a trade, learning a skill, starting a family, buying the first little car that they could use to go to their job, whatever it is. He lost those 9 years of his life only for the state to say, well, okay, the magistrate said, well, state's evidence is bad, you're innocent, have a nice life, collect your plastic bag with your belongings and go with God. What are you doing? When you go back out into the world, into the country?
Just a couple of months ago, I literally begged a judge to allow a young man to be released on bail after 8 years on a bailable offense with no antecedent. He was forgotten. He went in as a child in YTC at 17 years. Mm-hmm. 8 years he remained on remand. I cried when that guy, I stood outside the prison with his mother to make sure and did the necessary payments and so on to get people to take him out. He immediately arranged a job for him. He's working and all. His mind is not the same.
No, you can't. You can't be.
8 years for an allegation of shooting with intent. And I was being fought down by the system for asking them to show cause why this man must not be allowed bail. They try to turn it around on me and say nobody applied for bail for him. He's so entitled. Nobody has.
Bail has turned into, it has evolved and morphed into a form of punishment, restriction on bail, as opposed to what it is meant to be, which is to secure attendance in court. I see no reason, unless you really pose a serious threat to a witness or to society of reoffending, or unless there's serious cause to believe that you will abscond, I don't see a reason to deny anybody bail. Quite frankly, given the circumstances that we are living in right now with how long it takes for cases to move through the court and so on, and the conditions in prison, because you are essentially depriving people of opportunity when you put them in remand. There just aren't enough opportunities while people are on remand to make anything, to do anything constructive with their life.
Now, I want to bring Dr. Moonilal in at this point, but when you talk about bail, they're being transformed, into a tool of punishment. I mean, to me, that speaks again to a philosophy, and there's a change in philosophy. And I mean, yeah, okay. We are UNC mainly. I know that Darren is not. He's independent, and I want to make sure everybody is aware.
I'm not politically affiliated anywhere. I have friends and my loyalty spans.
Right.
Unless of the color of the flag.
But for the UNC members on here, obviously we can pound the PNM very easily, because I mean, even over time, when you look at a graph, the homicide rates, every time the UNC are in power, it goes down, and when the PNM comes in, it spikes up.
Let me be quite frank with you, Kirk. The UNC also enacted legislation during the tenure of the partnership to place restrictions on bail. But the fact is that we are willing, and we have admitted to saying that it did not work, and that the type of it just didn't make a difference. We have taken a similar position with the anti-gang legislation. Anti-gang legislation was the brainchild of the partnership. It first came into effect on the partnership because we realized we had a serious gang problem. But if something doesn't work, do you just continue to do it for the sake of public relations? Yeah. And what you have right now, it is good public relations. I can't tell you how many people have sent me messages in, how could you want murderers to get bail?
Yeah.
Well, firstly, nobody is giving bail to a murderer. It's someone accused of murder.
Correct.
But it's good public relations to say that anybody police lock up is guilty. It's good PR to stand as a politician. And I always say I'm not, and many people tell me I'm not a politician. But I take that as perhaps a compliment in the context that it's given. But I'm not about cheap public relations. I'm about meaningful change. And I believe that if you start treating people who are accused of crime as though they are guilty, then it's a very slippery slope that you're going down. And I say without a fear of contradiction that the state, sometimes the evidence against people is very weak, and to deprive those people of bail, you're doing more harm than good going forward. And I am also not about rehashing the past. Who passed which law, what you did when you were in office, and what you're doing now. The fact is you have a problem now and you deal with it, and you come up with new ideas, new solutions, innovative things. You want to convict people and then put them in prison, no problem. As Dr. Moonilal said, invest the resources in CCTV, because you know what's a major problem we have right now with crime detection and conviction? The unreliability of eyewitness evidence. How do you address that? By investing money in CCTV, by investing money in DNA, right? Mm-hmm. If you could convict sex offenders on DNA evidence, as opposed to, he say, she say, as opposed to, what we do now. I remember having a conversation with one of my colleagues who could not believe that the majority of rape convictions in this country is without DNA evidence, because we simply don't put the resources there. The DNA lab, I asked the question in Parliament the other day that they're building, it still doesn't have accreditation. So we are still waiting 10 years for DNA to go to the UK, to the US, to Jamaica, and so on, to get tested, to come back here. You remember the Sean trial when it was coming up, they still didn't even have the results of that matter from 10 years ago.
And that speaks to Dr. Moonilal's point about the resourcing and so forth. And I want to bring Dr. Moonilal in here to because especially as we're talking about these programs and so forth, and your experience. You were on the National Security Council for 5 years. You were in 2 administrations. Now, I would really love to hear from your perspective. What you saw, even though you were Minister of National Security, but from the cabinet perspective, from the National Security Council perspective, what you saw that was actually working in the past. I remember things like the E99 service from the Panday days, and you mentioned the IATF, which is the Interagency Task Force, the Joint Army Police Patrols. All these things were brought in. There was another thing, I can't remember because it wasn't. There's some acronym, another acronym too about the Joint Army Police that was brought in under the first UNC administration as well.
Well,
community conflict. Tell me from your experience.
I think one of the important lessons of the past is the hands-on approach of having competent law enforcement ministers.
Yeah.
Managing crime is not really one man job, one woman job. I would go further to say it really is not a job of a prime minister alone per se, but he or she has to get a level of competence among, I think, 4 or 5 persons. And I can tell you, an attorney general, a minister of national security, legal affairs, in some cases, social development, justice is something we had, fleshed out as a separate issue to deal with prisons. There's a body of people called law enforcement ministers, but they have to be competent. Now, I mean, with little respect to Fitzgerald Hines, I mean, if you would put all the incompetent ministers in government in a cupboard, he would be in the top quartile of the incompetent. He has failed in possibly every ministry known to government. And they just cannot cope. I mean, he simply cannot cope, and we leave it like that. But the point I'm making...
I just want to emphasize something you're saying. When you said that, the first thing that came to my mind, I remember when there was a tent standoff between the Muslimin and the government, and the offenses being built, and when
I remember Mr. Pandey was Prime Minister.
Down of Baka and Theodore.
I would tell you, Kurt, Mr. Pandey was Prime Minister, and I can say, I mean, I have been around. I saw him a couple of days before as Prime Minister, and I asked him, I said, but this is a serious crisis. On Saturday morning, there's a showdown between the army and the Jamaat al-Muslimin, and the country is in enormous tension. And, would the government be standing firm? Would we negotiate? Would we have some type of consultation, some type of, discussion on the matter? Because the society was extremely tense. It was in the immediate aftermath, a couple of years of the attempted coup. And Mr. Pandey's government position was that there can only be one government in the country. There can't be 2. Yep. And if you're in the government, you are the government. And the criminal elements cannot rule, or those alleged to be criminal cannot rule. It is the government must rule. And today,
people of substance, of real substance.
Yeah, I mean, I can call, whether it's Joe Theodore, is others, and so on. When we were in office as well, I mean, don't forget, we had John Sandy was an extremely strong gentleman. We had other ministers of national security, Emmanuel George, hands-on ministers. Mr. Warner was there for a time. But we had strong hands-on ministers. Mr. Griffith as well. I mean, Mr. Griffith is a man who monitors situations almost by the hour. You need hands-on, you need competence. I want to get back to 2 issues before I move. I think the time has come in a policy sense to consider now a new structure, a new creature for maritime and border management of this country. We need to now simply look to the institutions we have, collapse them because they have not worked. When we speak about firearms coming in refrigerator and what you call microwave and all these kind of things, that is the reality Darren is telling us about. The issue now is a policy recommendation. We must now dismantle the current ineffective, archaic colonial system of customs and management and all of that, and introduce now a new pillar of a new maritime and border management institution that brings the best of the best, including technology, together to deal with this problem in a confrontational manner. And the other matter, Kurt, is that sometimes we don't talk about it a lot, but we have to. The issue of white-collar crime.
Yeah.
Now, when you talk white-collar crime, people say, oh, gosh, people accuse the UNC of this and accuse the PNM of that and all kind of thing. The NAR, the UNC, have the proudest record in passing laws, in developing institutions, in developing policy to deal with white-collar crime. In fact, people would tell you the Integrity in Public Life Act, the Integrity Commission machinery, all of those type of things are really creatures of a NAR-UNC partnership. When we were in government as well, we passed several pieces of laws and developed institutions, gave resources to white collar crime fighting units and so on to deal with it. In this country, you cannot deal with crime unless you address as well white collar crime.
Yeah,
And
because
how
I
do you
mean,
deal
because
with white collar crime?
it's not the little boys who are bringing in the guns from
No,
Correct.
and
US.
third, I will say it is simple but sophisticated. The matter is procurement. How long did it took them, and they still cannot implement procurement legislation. And procurement legislation deals with fixing the matter of white collar crime. They accused our administration of everything under the sun, but 7 years later cannot generate one criminal case of one kind or another to deal with issues of any wrongdoing. So that what the PNM does is they drown you in propaganda.
Yeah.
They drown you in Movelang. And they have absolutely nothing to show for it by way of dealing and managing the white collar criminals in this country. Because the people who bring in the guns, as we know, it will not be the guy on the street corner who's sitting down smoking a weed somewhere. It will be the persons connected to significant capital resources.
That brings in microwaves and
to,
washing machines.
yeah, the persons who are connected to trade, to the trading sector, the persons who are connected to business in some cases. They are the ones who more likely than not will have some type of connection to the drug trade, to the gun trade, and so on. And you have to deal with that in a confrontational manner with law enforcement and address white collar crime. White collar crime is not, generated by 2 or 3 fellas making box drain at the side of the road. It is generated by high traders, high flyers, and that type of thing. And if you have border management that is solid, you have a suite of white collar crime fighting strategies, I think you can make a dent at the ground in terms of murder, in terms of serious crime. I will give you one example before I close off my second round here. A simple thing. When we were in office, officers came to National Security Council, Kurt, and told us, they said, listen, all crimes are being committed in this country. They generally, the crime would be using firearm. But do you know it's always involving, generally, again, I'm generalizing, it involves a stolen vehicle. The police told us, they said, listen, let us deal with stolen vehicle, larceny of motor vehicle. Mm-hmm. Do you know we put in place a certain strategy, a certain approach, we resourced, certain areas were highly resourced, and a strategy developed. I don't want to speak too much about that strategy, but a strategy was developed to deal with larceny of motor vehicles. Would you believe, Kurt, in the subsequent 3 months, 4 months, serious crimes, robbery, shooting, house larceny and all that type of thing, went down by, I suspect, around 35 to 40%, simply because we put an accent on preventing people from stealing vehicles. And we knew the type of vehicles that were likely to be stolen and used in robberies and murder and shooting and so on.
B12, B13, Wing Road, yeah.
Yeah, it was no rocket science to put in place with a highly developed unit in the TTPS to prevent stealing cars. And if you stop stealing cars, the bandit is not going to run away on a horse. They're not going to jump on a bicycle and pedal out. They're going to jump in a car, and we know the car. In fact, between me and you, we know the color of the car, we knew the make of the car, we knew when the cars were produced. So we just said, look, let's prevent those cars from being stolen, and we will reduce crime. And those practical, competent, driven strategies also have an effect on the ground.
Those are very important points, and I want to bring this other question to the group as a whole, which is one thing that the government likes to say all the time is that, whenever you present a problem, it's happening all over the world, right? I mean, that always irritates me. But let's say in the 1990s. In the United States in particular, but in many places around the world. And Rudy Giuliani was a big, face of this. How crime, people thought that New York was always going to be a high crime place. You can't do it, it's an urban area. You can't stop it. And then he proved it wrong. And in fact, in almost every major city in the United States, that happened, and crime started to go down across the world since then, but crimes started to increase by us. Now, I mean, there are some people here who have a hopeless view of crime, saying it will never, never get fixed. And I'd like to know, in a sense, basically, your own sense of maybe optimism or pessimism in a best case scenario. Like, so let's say if we were in government and we had all the political will and all the resources, right? I mean, do you think that say some, like people talk about Al Capone was brought down by tax, by tax evasion and so forth, and you just talked about the larceny of vehicles, which was an amazing way that you figured out to reduce these crimes. In terms of because you're on the ground, and I know Jayanti and Darren too, being attorneys and working in the court system. I mean, how optimistic or pessimistic are we in a downward spiral of a culture of crime that we cannot ever get out of, or do you actually think that we can do this fairly quickly? I'd just like to throw it open to see if anybody has any immediate feeling on that.
Well, I mean, I always say nothing is impossible. I like that you raised the issue of New York. What most people don't realize is that New York, you think bright lights and Manhattan and all that now, but there was a time when New York was really a mob-ruled city with rampant crime. And the Giuliani approach was really tackling and taking on the mafia, the mob.
And you would never be caught in Times Square at night. I mean, I'm old enough to remember that. Yeah.
Times Square was really where the mob ran their prostitution and all other forms of illegalities that was funding them and laundering their money. I have to agree with Dr. Moonilal. The key to really tackling crime in a long-term way is white collar crime, because if the money isn't there, I remember a police officer telling me when I was very young, he says only two things cause people to commit crime: love and money. So you have the type of crime that, domestic based crime as man, woman, altercation, family, things, whatever. And then you have the money type crimes, which driven by money. Money is at the root of a lot of the crime, whether it's through poverty, whether it's through, whatever it is. Legislation doesn't solve crime, but properly implemented legislation can make an impact. And I think it is worth saying, for the record, that all of the legislation that we have right now that really deals with accountability and transparency and tackling white collar crime came under the two UNC administrations. You have the Freedom of Information Act, a powerful tool for accountability. You have the Integrity in Public Life Act. You have the Proceeds of Crime Act. You have the establishment of the FIU. And the work that they are supposed to do, whether they are doing it and resourcing properly, and whether all that is a different scenario. But we have always, I think UNC governments have always shown, and procurement, as Dr. Moonilal mentioned, that's a huge step in the direction of cutting back on white collar crime. Because if you have poor procurement procedures, then you're going to have people basically having access to funding and funding crime through ghost gangs and projects and whatever, and all of that coming down the road. So you have laws that are there if you implement them properly. So it's not hopeless, because it was done in the past. As Dr. Moonilal mentioned, when you have the legislation giving police and law enforcement and other agencies the tools that they need, then you also have a hands-on approach to tackling the basic things, something like, just like we talk about guns, vehicles are really the tools, just like a gun. It's the tools that you use to commit crime. So if you take away the tools, you take away the guns through the better border protection, you take away the cars by cracking down on stolen vehicles, you can tackle the problem. And then again, as I said, you have the social side. If you start tackling the social issues that we have, from the root causes of crime. So it's not hopeless. I think that you just have to have people equipped. I mean, I always say that the closest that some of the present persons, we've identified law ministers who are walk around, so to speak, with crime and justice and so on. But the closest that I think Fitzgerald Hines has come to dealing with crime is when he put somebody in court for kicking water on him. We have an attorney general who boasts about a legislative history in terms of being tough on crime and justice and so on, but cannot show any meaningful impact on crime statistics. we've had even before ministers of national security who really didn't display any meaningful contribution towards tackling the problem of crime. Social development is something that is really like a perpetuating the cycle of poverty and dependency right now, as opposed to alleviating people out of a life of crime. And so I don't think it's hopeless at all. I think that with the right ideas, the political will, and the people who have experience and competence in the field to get things done, you can make a difference. Another thing that, as you mentioned, New York, and one of the things that they have done in the United States that we really, I think, need to tackle here is they have gotten very, very tough on corruption within law enforcement. And until you tackle the issue of corruption in law enforcement, you are not going to make a serious impact on crime in this country. You cannot have drug blocks controlled by law enforcement and expect that you're going to tackle crime. And that's a very serious problem that we have here. So that to me is something that requires a lot of political will. I know probably any police officer looking at this now will stoop, roll their eyes and not be happy about saying it. But the fact of the matter is, it is a problem. And I think Darren talked about confidence in TTPS. Do you know how many people are fearful of coming forward as witnesses to crime as well, because they believe that the police are working hand in hand with the criminals? And until you restore that level of trust and confidence that the public can have in the TTPS by cleaning it up, you're not going to get anywhere.
I mean, when you talk about restore, I'm not even sure. I mean, and this is not necessarily an indictment on our police officers, but really in the culture. I've been abroad, for many years of my life too. And when you see the relationship of people to the police, when they see a police officer, they're happy. Oh my God, a police officer is here. It's a very alien experience. For here, even little children say, "I call in the police for you," and you get frightened. The police is something to be frightened of in our culture. That's our cultural approach to police, whereas abroad, I see it's an entirely different thing. So that is something that we need to tackle.
I remember having a conversation one time. This was shocking to me. I was much younger, and it was shocking to me that someone said that they had a licensed firearm and they were scared. They were going to travel or something, and they were scared to lodge it in the police station because they did not want the police in their district to know that they had a firearm, because they were afraid that the police themselves would then inform people that, hey, this man have a gun in his house, go in there, rob him, take his gun. Because that's how people sometimes view police in the area, in the district, when things go, when you have massive corruption. So tackling corruption in the police service is something that it's a mammoth task. It's not a one administration thing that you could deal with in, as was said, a 5-year cycle. And you have to tackle it head on though, and make some tough calls and some tough decisions in order to deal with that. But that is a step that has to be taken if you want to really tackle crime.
Well, I think this segues right into Darren. And Darren, I know you are non-political, so from a non-political perspective, you can speak about this in terms of your optimism or your pessimism, and of course you're in the system as a lawyer every day, before the courts, and what's your view as to how easy is this to crack so that we turn around our situation, or you think this is like a long haul? What's your view?
Well, firstly, I'm always hopeful. I will always be hopeful, because I am part of this structure. I am part of this society. I have friends, I have relatives, I have persons that I obviously wouldn't like to hear things. There are home invasions. It's real brutal out there. Real brutal. And it's as if each and every one of us has a duty. It's like picking up a piece. The country is broke. It's a broken society. And each one of us has to pick up a piece and try to put it in. And eventually we'll get that whole, again, obviously there's not, and there wouldn't be perfection. And I'll give an example. Look at these garrisons where people live in the heart of Port of Spain. You go up at a particular place and you're going to get tracks, alleyways, galvanized structures. It's hard to police those areas. What is being done to transform these areas so that you could place it on a grid. Well, all right, Tom John is living there, he does this, he does that. They have intelligence and know who are the persons. Why are they not transforming this place? Then some would want to say that attempts being made is being resisted, and they would say that there are those on one side of the political divide who will just use the opportunity to file particular constitutional actions and talk about rights being denied and, in essence, leave them with it. But this political will is needed that when decisions need to be made in the interests of society, it must be made. But it must also be made with consideration. You can't just take the people them and dump them in a particular place. Then all you're doing is moving the situation to somewhere else and giving other people headache. You are aware that a particular part or parts of Port of Spain is the launching pad for particular types of activity. And I'm saying that Ms. Lutchmedial is as if she's in my head. She's speaking of all the different issues and factors that truly, I don't know if it's a lawyer thing or because she's touching on it precisely. But very little I could say to add to it. The solutions are all intertwined. Social services, partnership, elimination of corruption in the police service, tackling white-collar crime. That's a major factor everybody's ignoring, where everybody wants a partner with a white collar and not understanding exactly. This is where this is the genesis of it here. This is the genesis. And correctly, as Dr. Moonilal said, and Sister Lutchmedial, that is what's needed. That will needed is that decisions has to be made. We need to transform these ghetto-like areas so that patrols can take place in between streets. You go police afraid to go down in the alleyway and telling people that. When last year some major operation in particular places where they don't want to run down in that track. They don't want to go through that galvanized area and that kind of thing there. And it's there where the thing continues to fester. And nobody's trying to bring them out of that. I saw a gentleman the other day begging. Well, I know him, he's my client as well, begging to get this stench out of the place. Begging, and I will be coming down the bus route, but I will traverse there, the ease of traffic. By the way, I do have a bus route pass, it's not illegal. And I would get that stench from a particular place, coming straight into Port of Spain every morning. You know,
Yeah.
these
I used to
people-
work in the beach terminal and every day.
Why? So there is hope. There must be that will to get onto it, all hands on deck. Everybody agree for that common design, that common purpose, which is to pick up the pieces of this broken country, this broken society, and put it back together. That's what's needed, I would say.
Well, let me finally turn to you, Dr. Moonilal, in terms of your sense of optimism, or I don't know if pessimism is a word, but you know, like how difficult you think it would be to turn our country around, because we are in a bad place and we have to turn it around. So,
well, good. Let me say that I mean I'm a person with a very optimistic spirit, so I'm not at all deterred by the difficulties we see and by the challenges that we identify. I just want to say that I think dealing with crime here is clearly a long-term challenge and clearly holistic, clearly multifaceted. We know dealing with some of the quick wins matters that you can deal with, you know, speedily and urgently. But I am confident that if you get 3 or 4 very competent men and women in the security sector, very competent men and women, 3 or 4 in the security sector, within 90 days or so, you can start seeing some difference in terms of the ground, in terms of protecting persons, in terms of giving some measure of comfort, in terms of
getting some type of system to work. Sure, the justice system has to fix. That will take a little more time, but it has to start. It has to start. But it starts with competence. It starts with policy. It starts with program. It starts with the right laws. It starts with the economic activity. I want to go back to that issue that in societies, once the economy collapses, as it has here, that drives to crime. It drives to drug use. It drives to delinquency. It drives to the broken family syndrome that leads to kids being on the street. In fact, the great American actor, I think Denzel Washington, did an interview recently, and he said that at 7 years, children are not really criminals. He said children in the home don't have father and mother, and the gang leader become their father, and then the judge become their grandfather by putting them in jail. So we need that holistic approach to understand the importance of the home, the importance of economic activity, that a mother can make enough money to take care of the children, a single mother, that a father can provide for the children so that they don't go out on the street, they don't get lost. They are well equipped to deal with some of the challenges and to resist temptation. That comes as well with economic opportunity. So I'll end by saying that the twin issue for me in the courage of the future is the competence that is required, which I think we possess. And secondly, the economic expansionism that will deal with social problems, including crime.
All right. Well, I want to thank you all for coming, and before we close off, I mean, you had some excellent contributions, and I really appreciated it and learned a lot, and I'm sure our listeners did too. But if you have any final words, I'll invite you one by one. Let me start off with Jayanti. Any closing remarks?
I would jump off of something that Darren said, that everybody has a part to play. I think that, we have to stop viewing crime as a police problem or a government problem, or it's a societal problem, and everybody has a part to play. So we've talked about all the different aspects today of tackling crime, from a social level to a policing level to policy level and all of that. So it really does require that type of holistic approach. I would say to people as well that it's sometimes very easy to stigmatize persons who are criminals, but unless we change our way of thinking away from punishment and move towards reformation, as I said, I started off by saying we're going to be like hamsters on that wheel, just going forward, and churning people from our neighborhoods and back out. And I think that we do have to make an effort now and drive and have a change in our thinking. There's a reason why I think politicians and governments don't focus enough on rehabilitating persons who get into crime, even if it's petty crime from that level. And it's because it's just not popular. It's just not, it doesn't win votes. It's not something that any minister or somebody will get kudos for, as opposed to taking away bail and putting them behind bars, which is seen as tough and seen as being the solution. That gains popularity. But we have to look at it differently, and we have to consider that if we don't tackle the issue of reformation, of getting people back into society to become productive members of society, managing them, of course, in a very stringent way, and ensuring that we keep tabs on them and that we don't allow them to slip back into a life of crime when they come out of prison and they do their time, then we're not going to really make progress as a society.
All right. Thank you. Darren, do you have any final closing
I would
thoughts?
just be quite short in saying, let us not give up. Let's keep knocking, banging on those doors, forcing them to open it and to operate. Keep doing it. I applaud Dr. Moonilal for that fearlessness, and he keeps banging, keep beating it. You have nothing to fear, nothing to worry about. I will make my positive contribution in any which way I can to see that change, because I know it could be done. In some areas, it's quite simple for it to be done. It's obvious how it is to be done. And there are other areas that difficult, where we would just be part of the strands and make that rope. And that's, we would see it happening, not just for us, but for our children. All right, we'll make the sacrifice and bang down the doors and damage our wrists in banging and so on. But the kids then will have a open doorway, open play field to make us proud wherever he is. For those that believe in a heaven, when we're up there, we'll be able to watch down and say, well, we made this positive contribution to assist in picking up the pieces of this broken society and helping to repair it. So I'll just urge anybody that is willing to keep banging on it. And you all have my support, and anybody that is willing to make that positive contribution, I'm here to support them all times.
All right, well, great. Thanks very much. And Dr. Moonilal, any final thoughts for us?
Well, Kurt, I will just end by saying that this has been a fascinating discussion and a really policy-rich discussion and insightful as well, given that Senator Lutchmedial and Mr. Mitchell himself, I think between two of them, we have more than a generation of experience in law enforcement and the criminal justice system and the social dimension to crime as well. So that it has been a very fulfilling type of discussion. I will just end by saying that to me, the unlocking this problem will be dealt with on two lines, really: human agency and institution. And I think we are well equipped as a society with the human agency that is required. And as an institutionalist, I believe that we must, interestingly, I believe that we must protect society from politicians. Mm-hmm. All politicians have the yearning to overreach. And the role of a law and constitution is to develop the institutions to protect citizens. And I believe that with the right institutional capacity building, we can deal with crime, and with the human agency in place, this society has more than enough resources in terms of the intellectual and analytical capacity and the drive and certainly the courage and the fearlessness to address the issue of crime. So thank you, and God bless you and all the panelists, and I look forward to the production of this discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Moonilal, and to you, Mr. Migu and Sister Lutchmedial.
Thanks to everybody. This was a very interesting discussion. I hope it proves valuable. We'll watch it.
Yes, be blessed, and you all continue to be safe, please.
Yes. So I just want to say thank you to you, and thank you to our listeners and viewers of this. The February issue of the Checklist, which is the official newspaper of the United National Congress, will be out very shortly after this broadcast. So thank you. Have a good evening. And thank you once again to our guests as well.
Pleasure.
Bye.